Hi, so it's time for the penultimate episode of Broadchurch Review. First of all, I want to apologise that this is so late. I've been really busy all week, so I haven't had a chance to film the video, so it's going up like in the evening, the night before the next episode. Okay, I'm going to start by going through the Joe Miller trial stuff, and actually in this video, rather than me like doing the two recaps and then going on to questions, I'm just going to do like the whole Joe Miller story, questions, theories, and then move on to Sandbrook. I think that makes much more sense. I don't know why I've not done that in every video. So in terms of what happened in the episode, it was the last day of evidence in the trial. We find out really early on what that juicy piece of evidence that the defence team have, and I don't think it was particularly juicy really. It was basically that they found out that Ellie had given a cheque to her sister like after she gave evidence. So Ellie was recalled to give more evidence, and they questioned her on like her sister's gambling debts, and then revealed that they knew that she'd given her a cheque, which basically makes it look like she bribed her for having given evidence against Joe, which doesn't look particularly good for the prosecution side of things, because it's another kind of example of the police maybe not doing their job properly. We saw both sides give their closing statements, and on the prosecution side of things, they're making quite a big deal of the fact that Joe didn't take the stand, and saying, you know, if you were innocent, then surely you would want to protest your innocence and get up there and say that you didn't do it. But the fact that he, you know, his team didn't think he should face questioning, you know, kind of speaks for itself. On the defence side of things, they present their alternative theory, you know, saying that Mark interpreted a fumble in a car park as true love, and then he was brought back to reality after seeing Danny. And then like an argument happened and he killed him accidentally, called his friend Nige to help him dispose of the body. And they kind of say to the jury, well, can you be sure that that didn't happen? And how can you be sure that the story that the other side are presenting, that Joe did it, is true? And they also talk about all the mistakes that have been made by the police, and saying that the case has been compromised, and basically that you can't be sure that he's guilty. Outside of court, we see that Sharon's son hasn't been able to get an appeal for his case. We see Jocelyn admit to Maggie that she's in love with her. It's funny because I saw a couple of people on Twitter kind of saying, wait, I thought that they were sisters. I kind of just assumed the whole way along that they were like an ex-couple, but I don't think I mentioned it in any of my other videos, but I just kind of always assumed that there was some sort of romantic connection between the two of them, and there is now. So yeah. Opposite end of the scale, we see Beth telling Ellie that she's thinking of leaving Mark, and Ellie kind of says to her, you know, make sure that you're really sure about this, because the feeling that she has just now being in this relationship is nothing compared to feeling truly alone. I kind of see her point. I mean, obviously there's a lot of kind of reasons why they should split up. You know, Mark cheating on her is one thing, and it's going to be very difficult for them to really truly go over that and what happened with Danny. But at the same time, you know, I think it's maybe a bit of a rash decision. She's kind of basing that on all the stuff she's found out recently. So I don't know. I don't think it is going to be over for them. But at the same time, I think it'll be a while before they can get back to what they had before they lost Danny. We see the jury come back with some questions before they make their decision. So they ask about the view from the window of the cottage, and also if Mark was ever questioned as a suspect. And the Latimers kind of worry that that means that the jury are siding with the defence side and that they believe that he was the one that did it. We don't find out though what the jury think in this episode, because it ends on a pretty inevitable cliffhanger of them about to announce what their decision is. We know it's not unanimous, but we don't know what it is. I suspect though, I think if it had been a not guilty verdict, that's what the episode would have ended on, and then you would have been like, what, how can he be found not guilty, and have to wait a week to find out exactly what's going to happen next. So I think the fact that they ended it before they announced the verdict says to me that he's going to be found guilty, because if you'd found out at the end of the episode that he'd been found guilty, it's not really a big like surprise ending, is it? So kind of cutting it as they're about to say the verdict is a better cliffhanger if it's a guilty verdict. If it's a not guilty verdict, a better cliffhanger would have been to end it on not guilty. They did kind of like totally ham up the ending as well though. There were like a ridiculous amount of lingering shots on like people's faces and building up to this, like the jury being called back in. And I know like the whole series has been like that really. I mean, someone in the comments on my video last week mentioned that about, you know, how many shots of like people staring out to sea do we really need. And yeah, I totally agree. I think that that's something that they overuse a lot in this series. I didn't notice it as much in the last series, but in this one you just get, there's been so many bits where it's just like Claire looking out a window or Lee looking out across a field, you know. It's a bit ridiculous. On to the Sandbrook case, and finally the case has been officially reopened. Not that that really makes any difference to us watching it though, to be honest, because you're not seeing any other officers involved apart from Alec and Ellie, and technically Tess now as well. But yeah, it doesn't really matter to us that the case has been reopened really. One new person that we do see in this episode is Gary Thorpe. So he's inherited that Thorpe Agri-Service company from his dad, but it's gone bust, so that's why the place they went to visit the other week is just looks abandoned. You find out that he dated Lisa for a little while and that he was completely obsessed with her and used to follow her. But on the night of the murder, he was in hospital because he tried to commit suicide. They go and question Ricky about Gary, and at first he claims that he doesn't know who he is. Then they mention that Gary told them that he'd loaned him some money, and then he's like, oh yeah, I do know who he is. Alec clocks that Bluebell picture on his wall and asks him, you know, how long he's had it. He's all like, so do you like bluebells? Is there any reason why you've got this picture on your wall? And he also like obviously starts to piece things together in his head, and when he leaves he gets Ellie to phone that number that they found in Claire's phone, and of course they then hear Ricky's phone ringing in the background, so now they know that it was him who Claire had in her phone. I'm not sure how exactly he managed to piece that together. I'm guessing maybe seeing the bluebells kind of pieced together with Claire getting sent a bluebell in the post, and you saw him like look at a phone, although that's a bit of a tedious link. Yeah, they are kind of making quite a lot in this episode of like Alec being all like reborn after his operation and kind of back to his old self, so I guess we're supposed to now believe that he's back to like the great detective that he was before. We also find out that the pendant that we saw in the picture last week actually belongs to Claire. It was like her grandmother's, I think she said. You know, it was obviously loaned to Pippa at some point, it wasn't the other way around. She returns it to Alec, you know, revealing the fact that she was the one that stole it, and he's like obviously furious to find out that it was her. We also see Alec like rile up Lee by telling him that Claire was pregnant. It feels like it's kind of a bit irresponsible to tell him that. I mean, I know like Alec at this point has no sympathy for Claire, but he must know that by telling Lee this, he's obviously going to go off and like confront Claire, and given the violent tendencies, it's, you know, it's not surprising that it then leads to like an attack on Claire, which we see happen at the beach, and it's horrible. He's like dragging her into the sea, and I don't like her as a character, but it's not nice to see someone being like half drowned by her ex-husband. So yeah, I'm just kind of, I don't know if it sits well with Alec's character that he would do that. But it does kind of answer one of the questions that we had from earlier in the series. So that flashback that we saw of Alec and Claire apparently in bed together was actually him at the hospital with her when she went to have a termination of, we assume, Lee's baby, but it's never really confirmed that it is his. Not long after this like beach attack, you see Claire and Lee meet up again, and they basically like accept the fact that their relationship is over and that they can't get past everything that's happened. Which, you know, we could have told them weeks ago that was never going to happen. Lee talks about going back to France, and he kind of hints at the fact that there's someone that he knows over in France, which, going back to what Ellie said in a couple of episodes ago, that she thinks that maybe that's where Lisa is, given the like where her phone was used, and the fact that she could have been on her way over to France. So again, that kind of maybe suggests that Lisa and Lee, there's some connection there, that she was maybe over in France with him. Another thing that like Ellie kind of puts together is that the reason Lee knew about Gary was because of Lisa, which means, you know, he must have been closer with Lisa than he says. I don't know if I'm just not picking this up properly, or if they're taking like a complete leap. But I can't remember where are they getting this like Lee knew about Gary thing? Is it because, was it in the like evidence that he'd put together, you know, when he like handed over that big pile of stuff to Alec like earlier on in the series? Was Thorpe Agri-Services mentioned in that? I know that they asked Lee about it at one point and said, you know, have you heard of Thorpe Agri-Services? And he said no, and he said something like, oh, it might have been a company that Kate did the books for. Because you see like Alec and Ellie saying like, oh well, he maybe knew about them because he was having a thing with Kate. But then when they find out about Gary Thorpe and went out with Lisa, they're like, well, he must have known him through Lisa. It just, I don't know. When that happened, I was kind of like, how are you jumping to that conclusion? It seemed a little bit of like a tedious link to be like, oh, well, this means that Lee and Lisa definitely were together if he knew about Gary. But I don't know. It might just be that I'm missing that from earlier episodes. Or it could just be another little plot hole in this series, which would not be a surprise. Actually, on the Thorpe Agri-Service thing, we also see a flashback to Lee standing in front of the incinerator. So again, you know, he's saying that he doesn't really know anything about that, but he's obviously been there. In terms of my theory as to what's going to happen next, I don't really know. It seems like there's so many like things to like tie up with this case. Like, one thing that I find really strange is that they've never once gone to visit the parents of Lisa. Like, they've never been mentioned really properly. They've never visited them. They've focused on visiting Pippa's parents several times. So, you know, if she's missing, presumed dead, why have they never gone to speak to her parents? Just seems a bit odd. I mean, maybe that's going to happen in the last episode, but I don't know. It seems unlikely that they're going to introduce even more people into the final episode when there's all these other things they need to answer. Like, I think I said in the last video that I'm enjoying this storyline more, and I am enjoying this storyline, but it is a bit like, what's going on? Like, there's just all these different like connections between people that are like, you're getting to find out a little bit about it, but then not enough for it to really make sense. Like, I'm kind of doubtful now as to whether or not they're going to properly explore this whole like connection with the two couples, like Lee and Claire and Ricky and Kate, whether or not there was some kind of like weird thing going on, like weird like couple swapping thing going on, you know, to kind of explain more about, you know, those little flashes that we've got of Lee and Kate flirting, and like the fact that Ricky and Claire, you know, were obviously in touch on her phone. I hope that they're going to go into more of that in the last episode, but I'm not 100% sure that they will, just because it just seems like they're moving into like different directions. They're sort of giving us a little hint about something and then just moving on to something else instead. Maybe this last episode is going to answer all those questions and give us a nice round conclusion. We can hope. But yeah, just based on what's been happening, I'm just not really sure if it's going to be a satisfying ending. I still believe that Lisa is alive, and I think that I'm not really sure what I think happened to Pippa. My theory about like her dad being heavily involved is sort of slipping away a bit. But yeah, let's find out what happens in the next episode. I will have my finale video up probably next weekend, where I'll sum up what happened, whether I was happy with the direction they went in or not. So yeah, until then, thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye!